As far as I can tell, this is one of, or if not the most healthy way to grieve. Even though it was sad, I was happy for her that she was doing it healthily.
Hi, this is Angel. I spend about 90% of my time at home overcoming a mysterious illness, but I have friends all around the world doing interesting things. So, why not bring the world to me? Welcome to the Zoom with Friends show, where I gather my friends over Zoom to play silly games or discuss serious topics. All the fun and laughter is for a good cause, as it will help me raise funds to cover medical expenses. Thank you for watching. And here's today's show. Welcome everyone to the Zoom with Friends show. Today we have Shamilla, Yeary, and Golibe, Omenaka. And we're going to be discussing grief and how to go on after losing someone you love. Oh, and there's also me, narrator Angel. I'm here to provide commentary in the video. I'll share important facts and sometimes not so important facts like, cute baby. And don't I look good in purple? Okay, back to the show. Hey guys, thanks for joining me. Now, I know you from different parts of my life. Would you introduce yourself? Shamilla, go first.
All right. So I'm Shamilla. I currently live in Texas, in Prosper, Texas. I met Angel in South Africa, and that's where I was born.
I was in South Africa working for a nonprofit called Africare. My internship was to help their digital villages. These were computer centers set up by companies like Africare and Microsoft to help underserved areas get access to computers. I got to visit cities like Soweto and all over South Africa. I love that job.
I am South African.
Pause here to acknowledge a couple facts. One, South Africa has the best national anthem outside of ours, of course, Nkosi Sikelele Africa. We sang it at Harvard as the Kumba Singers for Nelson Mandela. Story for another time. Two, Shamilla is both African and Indian. Did you know that South Africa has the largest population of Indians outside of the Indian subcontinent? And bonus fact, Shamilla is a great cook. I ate often at her house. I'll share a funny memory, or maybe not so funny memory, of having dinner with her dad later in the video. Okay, now back to the intro again.
I lived in San Francisco for about 9 years, and we moved to Texas about 13 years ago. I work for a missions sending agency. I love the Lord. I wouldn't be where I am today if it were not for him. That's who I am. And I'm married to Matthew. He is awesome.
Matthew, awesome. We love Matthew.
Yes.
Thank you, Shamilla. All right, Golibe. Go ahead and introduce yourself.
Yeah, so my name is Golibe Omenaka. I was born in England to Nigerian parents.
I met Golibe in ministry school in Redding, California. The first thing I noticed about him is he's Nigerian, just like me. And his parents moved to another country to raise their kids, just like mine did. Except his parents went to the UK and mine went to America. Aren't his parents cute? Young love.
And I live in Redding, California. I have been here for 13 years now. I came in 2011. I was initially going to stay for 1 year before going back to England. I'm from Manchester in England, but then things obviously didn't work out like that. So yeah, I've been here for 13 years. I'm married to Brittany. I'm an American citizen now. So I've got a wife, 3 beautiful daughters, a dog, and a house. I would say that faith is central to all of who I am. I think I'm taking the idea of walking like Christ and being like Christ in the world extremely seriously. And it's one of those things that colors everything I do, almost everything. Let's not give myself too much credit. It covers the vast majority of everything that I do and is something that I think about multiple times every single day.
So that's the intro. We'll have a Brit, an American, and a South African discussing our grief stories. Well, actually, we're all Americans now. We're all African Americans discussing grief. 3 African Americans discussing grief. So first, Shamilla will go for 10 minutes, and then Golibe, and then we'll have some Q&A. We are getting vulnerable and going deep on the subject of grief. There's so many gems of wisdom that I put together in an ebook for free. link below. And I'll also be showing the highlights on screen. Let's go.
When I was preparing or thinking about today and doing this, one of the scriptures that the Lord reminded me of it was my sister's favorite scripture. It hung on frame in our home growing up. It was Romans 8:28. All things work together for good to those who are called according to his purpose and to those who love him. And I really believe that scripture with all my heart. I experienced grief when I was very young. I was 15 when my mother died. I was extremely close to her. And I had been a Christian probably for about 7 years by then. And I loved the Lord, was passionate about serving him. But when my mother died, I pushed the Lord away. And yeah, I had just major trust issues with him. When I look back, I think about just how differently I handled the grief. When I was 15, I pushed God away. And then in 2003, when my sister died, I ran to him. And then in 2004, when my dad passed, it was very different. The way I processed my grief, the way I handled it, the way I allowed God in the different stages was very different and had a lot to do with how I healed. Losing my mom took forever. My relationship with my sister was all really close. And then after my mom died, she became like a mom. So losing her was like losing my mom all over again. But this time, I had a closer walk with the Lord. And my sister was very ill. It would have been so very selfish to think that her life with me was better than the one she was going to have with Christ. It was hard because I lived in San Francisco. She lived in Durban, South Africa. We'd been separated for 9 months already when she died. I didn't really know anybody. I didn't have family here. I could only go to God. And he made it better. It was so hard. It really was. In some ways, it was harder than losing my mother. But in the times that I had with the Lord, it was so much sweeter because I was not in rebellion. I was in communion. And being in communion while you grieve is just such a beautiful thing because you literally allow God to take you in his arms and hold you. And somehow it makes it better. And then about 18 months after that, my dad passed away. By this time, I was dating my husband. Losing my dad was also really hard because he had raised me and was the only parent I had known for so many years. Angel remembers my dad. He was a sweet man and had done so much for me. My father dying was not abandoning me. It was the kindest thing that God could do for my dad to take him home, because my dad had lost his wife, and in a space of 9 months, he had lost 2 of his children, 2 of the children that he was very close to. And so I know that he died of a broken heart. And I also, on reflection, think it would have been terribly selfish to hang on to him, knowing just how broken he was from having lost my sister. Knowing who Jesus is more intimately has really helped me walk through the grief differently than when I lost my mom. And it changed me. When my mom died, it embittered me. But after my dad died, it just made me understand that Jesus does know best. And that one is hard. That's a hard one to wrestle with. By the time I celebrated my 35th birthday, I literally had no family. And that was hard. But it also taught me to cherish the family that I do have in my husband and my in-laws and all the people that the Lord put into my life after that. And the grieving never stops. I wish I could tell you that it stops, because it doesn't. A smell will bring tears to your eyes, a memory, a song. The other night I was lying in bed and just about to go to sleep, and I heard the sounds outside, and they reminded me of when I was a child and I would live with my aunt, and I could hear the outside sounds. Hearing those sounds made me yearn for my mom. And I thought, how weird, all these years later, I'm lying in another country, in a different bed as an adult, still yearning for my mom. But you know what? It didn't make me cry this time, because I understand that so many things in my life would never have happened if I had not lost my mom when I did. And as hard as it was, as hard as it probably will be for the rest of my life, it was also so good. And having God help me and hold me through all of those years has been the best. And I wouldn't trade that for anything.
Yeah, first of all, yeah, I just want to say, Shamilla, what you shared was, yeah, so beautiful and so relatable in in so many ways. My first major experience with grief was actually when I was 10 and my elder brother passed away. He had been sick. He was like 6 years older than I was. And so he had been ill for as long as I could remember. And it was one of those things where, I have no or very few memories of he was the middle child of my older brother being well. And so even at around like 9 or 10, I remember my dad, he had to sit me down, have the conversation with me. Okay, your brother's not doing too well. So from my perspective, it wasn't a shock. It was still very sad, but I'd had to confront that reality at 9 or 10 before he did eventually pass away. And then my other major experience with grief is like in many ways ongoing. It's that 8 years ago, my dad had a stroke, which basically left him incapacitated and needing full-time round-the-clock care. So my dad is still alive, he's still breathing, but he's not the man that I grew up with and who raised me, type thing.
Yes.
He can't really stand up by himself. His personality's different. He can't really move the left side of his body. And yeah, and that was actually quite sudden. And even now, as we're talking about it, it's like with my brother, the tail end was beforehand, leading up to it happening, boom. And then with my dad, it happened suddenly, and then we're living out of the tail end from the other side of the grief. But the big thing is always for me is just like the questions. I'm always like, what would life have been like if my elder brother was still here?
Yeah.
Because one of the things that I remember most about him was just how kind he was.
Mm-hmm. Uh-huh.
And yeah, we all have those like seasons in life.
Yes.
Teenagers, being a teenager is hard.
Mm-hmm.
And the big question is, wow, what would that have been like if I'd have had his kindness there as like a voice of wisdom to help lead me through? Not to say that my other family members weren't there for me, but it's just like, oh, wow, what would that have been like? And
Mm-hmm.
with my dad, it's that weird thing where I think that grief has given me like a healthy perspective in some ways because I think that without realizing it in the Western mind church mindset, even if we say we're not like proponents of the prosperity gospel, We think that God's going to come in and everything's going to be like, everything's just going to keep on getting better and better. And then we'll say we don't believe it, but if we get like a big raise or an amount of money, we'll be like, yeah, this is because we've been faithful. And then if something's gone wrong, we'll say, oh gosh, what have I done wrong? It forces you to like, when you encounter grief and stuff like this, it forces you to really reassess what is and what isn't and why things are the way they are. And sometimes it's just like, you know what? I just don't have an answer for that. And I've just got to keep on moving forward.
Yes. Yeah. Yes.
And so with my dad, the situation surrounding it felt like particularly cruel because I was born in England to Nigerian parents. So both of my grandfathers had died before I was born.
Yeah.
I remember feeling like tangibly, "Oh, I wish I had grandparents around me." I never met either one of my grandfathers because they both passed away, unfortunately. And I was always really excited to have my parents be a part of my children's lives. And then here we are, through no decisions of my own, purely led by what I felt was God. I was living 5,000 miles away from my parents. We had just found out we were pregnant. And then all of a sudden, boom, my dad has this stroke. And while he's still here, my kids never been able to interact with the man that I knew. As dad, you can twist yourself into knots with all of these types of things, with all these types of questions. What have I been deprived of? My dad, when he had all his mental faculties, he was a pediatrician. And so every time my kids have an illness, I'm just like, "Oh, man, I just wish I could call my dad and say, hey, this is happening." And he'd be able to tell me what's going on. And I can't because he's not there. And we're going back to England for Christmas and we're going to take my kids to the care home to see my dad, but they're not going to get to experience him. And I feel like it just really forces you to reckon with things. And the biggest obstacle I would say in grief, as pertains to the Lord for me, is not allowing my heart to get hard. And for me, when I read through Hebrews about how the writer of Hebrews is talking about how the Israelites continually hardened their heart towards the Lord.
Yeah.
And because of that, they never entered rest. If I had the mindset that God was supposed to make every single aspect of my life move up and to the right, as it should do in a capitalistic society, as it should do in free market, as it should do in the prosperity gospel, I would be really upset. But if things go down and to the right as time goes on, I have to try with everything within me to keep a soft heart to the Lord.
Yes.
And
Yes.
the the Bible story that kind of shows me a nature of God that I call upon quite often is actually the story of when Jesus raises Lazarus from the dead.
Mhm.
And the 30-second version of it, Jesus knows that Lazarus is dying. And he's, okay, it's 2 miles away. Let me just wait here. It's like a 25-minute walk. Let me just wait here for 2 days. And already before Lazarus dies, listen, Lazarus is going to die and I'm going to raise him from the dead. And so Lazarus dies. Jesus takes that 25, 30-minute walk. He's met by Martha and then he's met by Mary. And Jesus knew what was going to happen. What he knew was going to happen had happened. And he meets Martha, who's full of grief, while he's on the way to fix the thing that caused her to grieve in the first place. He's carrying the solution. But when he sees her, he doesn't say, "Stop crying, just give me 15 minutes." Begins to cry, but, and he weeps with her. The
Yes.
first time I saw it in that light, I was just like, okay, there is something about God that this is showing me that I do not understand. I see it, I read it, and it says, even when he's coming with the solution, even when he'd have any reason, I've got kids. Like whenever my kid loses something and they're crying, I'm like, here it is. You don't need to cry. But
Yes.
Jesus was like, no, because you're feeling grief, I'm going to stop and weep with you.
Yeah.
And that is something about him that I see it, I understand it, mentally, but I'm still trying to cross that bridge from my head to my heart to be like, okay, God, like in the midst of this, you are actually sat here with me. Because I believe in the God who is going to come back and restore all things. That's
Yes.
what he's going to do. That is what he was doing with Martha. Hey, I'm bringing restoration. But in that middle bit, like you're meeting me as I'm on the way to restore, I will sit and I will weep with you. because your grief is important to me, and because you're grieving, I will grieve too. And so that's something that I call upon a lot if I'm having those bad moments. It's like, okay, God is grieving here with me. I can't feel it per se, but I'm recalling that story and I'm leaning upon that because yes, you're here. You are grieving with me.
Thank you, Golibe. And Shamilla is beautiful. I need a Selah. Ooh. We all need a Selah after that one, girl. I've counted 9 gems so far, and I see there's 11 more in our absolutely free, beautifully designed ebook. And there's a prize coming at the end of the video. Please stick around to the end. So, has something connected with you? Don't be shy. Leave a comment below. Okay, deep breath. Let's go back in. I personally am really resonating with the fact that you can have a parent that's with you, but they've changed, and then there's that present loss. Yeah, I remember when my mom passed away, there was the grief of losing her when she was different from the stroke. There was a grief of losing her when she left. And there was a grief of losing the mom she would have been. And those 3 griefs, I didn't know those were all 3 things I would have to process. And it's different.
Yes.
You grieve your future, you grieve the past, you grieve the loss. Okay, we've finished both Shamilla and Golibe's share. Now we're going to go into some Q&A time where we get to ask them our burning questions as it relates to grief. First question, is there a healthy way to grieve?
Grief is one of those things that's inescapable. I've witnessed people going through grief to varying degrees, and I would say that the people who I've seen go through grief in the way that is the healthiest are those who just let themselves feel it. Honestly, like I actually saw my eldest, who's 7, she actually modeled this really well when her hamster died. She'd be going about the day and she'd say, you know what, I miss Madeline, the hamster. She'd stop, she'd feel what she was feeling, she'd give herself space to cry, and she'd talk about it, she'd recognize it, she'd stop, she'd express it, and then she'd move forward for the day. And then she'd stop, like maybe an hour later, recognize it, express it, and move on. Stop, recognize, experience it, and move on. It's going to be there. If you don't let it out, it's just going to fester and become really unhealthy. The healthiest way and the best way to do it is to just let yourself feel it. It's an interruption.
What helps you get through grieving? Is there help for people who are grieving?
Angel, my heart really grieves for the person who doesn't know Jesus and experiences grief. My heart breaks for that person. I don't know if such a person will someday watch this video. And so I would say to that person, there is hope, and there's hope in God. Believing in something matters and help you grieve. And if you don't believe in God, then get help. See a counselor. I had God. I've been a believer or a Christian since I was 8. And through all my phases of loss and grief, I had God. But when my dad had passed away, my dad had passed in December, and in January I got engaged. And so there was no time to grieve. I was preparing for a wedding and just stuff happened. But grief will wait for you, because it was waiting when all of life had settled. It was there waiting for me. And with my dad, it manifested in a different way. I would have these really, really vivid dreams of him where I would wake up crying. And I personally really am not a believer in therapy, but my husband encouraged me to go and see a Christian therapist. And I went for something called theophostics. And man, I went for a couple of sessions, but it set something in my heart free. It gave me a heavenly perspective. It helped me understand, and it helped me grieve in a healthier way. your grief is always going to be there, but how you handle it matters. How you deal with it matters. And so do the kindest, most loving thing for yourself and deal with it in the kindest way for yourself. Whatever that looks like, whether it's going to church, whether it's going to a therapist, find a way of dealing with it.
Is there any help for the person out there that bristles at the thought of someone saying, oh, they're in a better place? Like they feel, I don't want to hear that. I don't want to hear they're in a better place. Do you have any advice for the person who feels like, oh, they're in a better place is spiritual bypassing / gaslighting?
I can understand that reaction, to be honest with you. I can understand in the midst of the pain and the confusion and perhaps the disappointment. Brian Zahnd is a pastor and a Bible teacher who I like a lot. And he's spoken about like Job. Job experiences this awful situation. And Brian Zahnd pointed out that his friends were actually being the most helpful version of themselves when they sat with him in silence for, I think it was 7 days.
Yes.
And it's when they opened their mouths, that's when they started saying all this nonsense. And if you're at a point where just even talking about God or whatever causes you to bristle, maybe you just need to sit in silence and maybe you just need someone to be with you. If you're the friend bringing the godly counsel, getting them to see the right perspective right away, forcing, dare I say, forcing or coercing them to, maybe isn't the most helpful thing. Sometimes someone just needs to be sat with while they're working through all their pain. When you're in pain, stuff is hard. If you've just broken your leg, obviously that walking is a good thing to do. But if you try and put weight on that thing in that moment, of course you're going to be like, no, sit me down, sit me down, sit me down. I don't want to do this. I can't do this. Sometimes that happens. Sometimes they just need to heal before they can start acting healthily again and turning to the Lord again, because it is hard. It is difficult. It is confusing. And maybe sometimes we think we need to get through things too quickly. And sometimes we think that it's like you've just got to have the right mindset right away or whatever. But sometimes you don't need theological advice. You just need someone who understands the pain you're in and can sit and weep with you.
Why is this so hard to get over? Why am I still grieving?
You will never be the same again after you've lost someone. I will never be the girl I was the day before my mother died. I will never be the same girl I was the day before my sister died. And I'll never be the same girl I was the day before my dad died. Death changes you. It changes your heart. And it will be with you for a lifetime. There's no getting over it.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I love Jesus. Yes, I have a very close relationship with it. But you can tell by the fact that I still get emotional talking about my mom who died 36 years ago, because grief is something that will stay in your heart forever. Perhaps until the day we see Jesus face to face, I don't know. But you don't get over it. This is not something you get over.
Mm-hmm.
And I
Yeah.
love that, because then we can say there is no right, there's no wrong way to grieve.
Yes.
There's no timeline, there's no speed. Do it your way. You don't have to get over it in 1 year and 3 years. What Shamilla is saying is, you never get over
Yes.
it. That's not even the goal. The goal, I think, the goal needs to be different. I think our culture says it happened, get over it. Why are you so sad about that? The goal should be different. Like, how do we process the life and celebrate it?
Mm-hmm.
How do we, and a lot of life is holding both the beauty and the pain.
Yes.
And I feel like that is what grief gives us the opportunity to do, is for every tear, there's a bit of celebration.
It's true. I had a friend of mine, I remember, gosh, in 2010, And her stepfather, who was essentially had raised her, he had been diagnosed with cancer and he was passing away slowly, and eventually he passed away. And she was dealing with the grief of that, and she was getting upset with herself for being so sad because he's in a better place now. But in the moment, it was like she felt as if God spoke to her saying, hey, like your stepfather was a positive in your life. He was a good man who like loved you very much. And he's not there with you anymore. So you've lost a good thing in your life. So of course you're going to be upset. And it was like the quote unquote right answer would be to say, oh, they're in a better place now, so they're having a party. But it's no, you've lost a good thing. Of course you're going to be sad about that. Of course you're going to be upset about it. Of course, when you remember how good a thing that person was to you and how much they impacted you, of course, like years down the line, it's going to make you feel sad.
Well, now that Matthew's introduced a little levity, and if you didn't catch it, go back and watch the beginning of this Why Am I Still Grieving segment and see the moment Matthew realizes Shamilla is recording live in her kitchen. It's a whole progression. You'll enjoy it. You're welcome. Okay, well, I'd like to share a story about the time Shamilla's dad tried my cooking. So there was a time I wanted to make dinner for Shamilla and her father. I had been eating over at their house and I felt it was my turn to give back. And so I decided to make something that I'd love to make, which is kimbap. Kimbap is like a Korean sushi with all kinds of yummy ingredients. So I set up the kimbap and I created the wasabi paste and I formed it into a leaf and it was lovely. We set the table and before I knew it, the whole wasabi was gone and Shamilla's dad was quiet. I go, oh no, you're not supposed to eat that. Well, the problem was Shamilla's dad was used to Shamilla's food, which always started with a salad and then a curry. And so he saw something green and it was a leaf and he ate it like he would have if it was a salad. But unfortunately it was a pile of wasabi, and if you've ever had wasabi, it goes straight to your head and down to your soul. He was on fire and I was mortified. I felt like he would never forgive me. He did. He never yelled or raised his voice, but he looked so sad. I'm sorry, Shamilla's dad. You didn't deserve that.
Angel, I hope we helped you grieve in some ways, because you've experienced loss of both your parents, but also loss of health. And I hope as your friends, we can do whatever we can to help you grieve well.
Yeah, Shamilla's right. I do know a bit about grief. My story. My beautiful parents, Alice and Michael, created me, a gorgeous girl. But as they were declining in health and eventually passed away, I was declining in health. I was diagnosed with a series of mysterious ailments that led to hair loss, lesions all over my body that wouldn't heal, isolation, loss of my jobs, and disconnection from people. I did the best I could to stay positive, but my day-to-day experience was full of pain, full of grief for the life that I wanted, full of pain that I was feeling and the need for hope. And that's why I started this channel, to connect with friends while I'm healing and pursuing new treatment strategies. So if you enjoy watching this video, I'll give you a way to participate at the end, and you can join my team helping me on my hero's journey. Thanks. Why does it seem like we really don't know how to grieve well in our society? Why is it hard to grieve in our culture?
Part of our thing as Western Christians is that we don't know how to suffer well. Because we don't know how to suffer well, we get embittered because we think we are believers. This is supposed to be working out right. We're supposed to have the best jobs. We were supposed to have all our family until Jesus comes. And when suffering happens, we don't know how to suffer well.
One thing that I heard a couple of years ago that really struck me was that So you've got the wisdom literature in the Hebrew Bible, you've got the Proverbs, you've got Ecclesiastes, and you've got Job. And I think it was on the Bible Project. I heard someone say, we as the Western Church, we only lean on the book of Proverbs as wisdom. And in the book of Proverbs, if you put coin A into the machine and your coin is good, boom, you crank the handle, you get it. If you do good, you get good in return. But then you look at Ecclesiastes and Job, that idea is quickly turned on its head, especially in Job as well, honestly. There are these three parts of the wisdom literature, and we only in the West rely on Proverbs, where you do good, you get good, you do bad, you get bad. But if you look around, you see that's not really the case. Of course, the Bible has Proverbs to say, but it also has Ecclesiastes and Job to say. And we do ourselves a disservice when we neglect that, because then we're left unequipped to deal with doing the best we can, doing the right thing, only for the wrong thing to happen.
That is awesome. And now, because you mentioned coin. Great segue there, Angel. But yes, I do need to raise money to cover medical expenses. So if you're interested in giving, here are my account details. And if you want to know more about why I'm raising money, feel free to watch my update video linked here. Final thoughts. Grief parties?
Grief can be lonely.
Yeah.
If you let it be. And just from being with you and Golibe and talking about our grief, somehow it felt better. We
talked grief parties.
Yes, we talked through tears and we were okay with that.
Yeah.
And I think that is awesome, because our culture doesn't give enough room for grieving.
So that's a wrap. What an incredible show. Major thanks to Shamilla and Golibe for their lovely hearts and their powerful stories and some amazing accents. Big ups to our software sponsor, Joy-of-Flow, for covering our expenses for Zoom and Descript and Canva. And then the party doesn't end here. We have something special for you. Please take home our free ebook with the gems. Check out in the description other goodies we have for you. So get something special for yourself or a friend. We honor you, we thank you, and now a special tribute to those we've loved. In loving memory, in memoriam.